essays and you sent them home to your dad, and he brought them over to me, and
Tell the truth.
I'm telling the truth. I thought he was just a kid, so I gave him to my 17-year-old sister to read, you know. And she brought them back and she said, "You've got to read these." And so then I started reading them, and they were really indeed wonderful. And then Bruce came over and we became friends, and this was before your first book. It turned out you then later wrote a book. Your first book was called Learning to Bow. And Learning to Bow is about your time in Japan, you know, when you lived in Japan. And I remember that when you finished the manuscript, you invited me and some other friends over to your parents' house.
Really?
Yeah, you may not.
I don't remember this.
Well, I do. I remember Leslie Gordon was there, and several other people. And you said, now I'm going to lock the door. Well, you said, now I'm going to lock the door and read the whole book. Yeah. In other words, they were going to be captive. But it was really, really wonderful. You know, it had great scenes in it. I'll never forget the first scene in that book, where you know that it was a rite of passage or whatever it is to go swimming with the other male teachers, and you knew that they swim naked. So you were waiting for them at the top of a hill, and you were already naked. And they came up the hill, and they all had towels around. And you were, of course, much taller than they. And one of them stood beneath you and said, "Look at his nose; it is so high." But anyway, that book was a huge hit, and since then, you've written 12 books and 6 of them were consecutive New York Times bestsellers. There's that very, you know, I was amazed at some diversity. When you wrote after Learning to Bow, I believe the next one was Looking for Class at Cambridge University in England, and you debated a British student about which was better, to be British or American, and I remember seeing you on television doing that debate, and you were just really having the best time. It was like you really were having a good time doing it. You didn't look, well, you have no problem with public speaking, obviously, but I mean, you were actually having a good time debating this with this British student.
But I got crushed. I mean, the thing about that experience, and we'll double back, is that they said if you're funny, you could speak. It was like 3 minutes, unless you're funny, in which case you could talk as long as you wanted. So it was basically resolved. It was the Cambridge Union, you know, sort of. Yeah. There were these comedians and high-profile people. There was like resolved. America is like young, whatever, like young, dumb, and whatever, something like exactly. And so you had to defend or attack the thing. And so I spent weeks, and I worked on everything, and I wrote these jokes, and I tried them, and I rejected them, and I got out, and I was the first speaker, and I went, and it went really well, and then nobody else had prepared. So the guy who came after me had to respond to me. So the fact that he did what I did, twice as funny, with you know, no prep time, it just showed how that we were, whatever we were accused of being, like young, you know, unqualified. It was exactly the truth. Like I did my homework, and I was a good little boy, and I wrote jokes, and they were funny, and then he just destroyed me because he'd had 2 drinks and, you know, 3 hours sleep the night before, and he did it off the cuff.
In British private school.
I remember you as being very good. I thought you did great. But you know, when you did it, the only book of yours that seemed a little bit, I couldn't quite understand your choice of it, but you did a great job on it, was going to Nashville. And you hung around with Winona Ryder and all those people and wrote.
Judd,
yeah.
Winona Judd.
It didn't seem like you, but you did it, and you did a great job. And it seemed to me that you just were extremely eclectic at that period, you know, what your choice of subjects were. But then later you found your, you know, when you started doing the books, you know, you've written about everything in your life, which is great. But
so, how much time do we have? Because I want to take I mean, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Are you done? It meant to me in my life, and I'm capable of getting emotional about this, and what you mean to all of these people.
It's true.
And because what I want to say, what happened to me. So I grew up here. I'm writing a book about life stories now, which is how I came to meet Ivy, came to hear your life story. You've introduced me to a number of people. And to work a little bit backwards in the story, so I've created this thing called the Life Story Project, where I'm gathering life stories. I spent the last year gathering 217 life stories in all 50 states, age 20 to age 90, of people of an unimaginable array of life experiences. And so I've been deeply marinated and absorbed and consumed with the way we tell stories about our lives. And I've spent all summer, actually, for the first time, you had an intern way back when, for the first time in my life I had an intern, I got a team of 4 interns, and we transcribed all these stories and coded them for 59 different questions over the summer. And I've been looking for patterns, and one of the things that I realized is that every time I tell the story of my life, I begin with 2 things. I begin with place, and I begin with belief, right? I always say I'm a 5th-generation Jew from Georgia, right? And the way I could always have thought about it in my life is that those are things. Like I grew up in the South. I love the South. I love the family-ness. I love the story-ness. I love the stickiness. But I also grew up Jewish in the South, which meant I was sort of had a foot in and had a foot out. And I grew up Jewish in America, and I love the family-ness and the story-ness and the stickiness, but I grew up in the South, and that not only is separate from the history of America, of Judaism and the history of the world, but also the history of Judaism in America, right, which is mostly a Northeast or Midwest, or even, it's not particularly a Southern story the way it's often told. And so I grew up with these 2 storytelling traditions, and they collided in me in a lifetime of storytelling. But also a lifetime of not entirely being of every room I go into, I'm a little bit of it and out of it at the same time, as I am in this room. I'm like all of you, and I'm different from all of you, and that's how I sort of conceive the world. So I grew up here, and I left, and I went to Yale, as you said, and I found that I learned about myself as a Southerner by leaving the South and going to the North. And this was the mid-1980s. I was born in 1964, the tail end of the baby boom, and I wanted to learn about America, and this was the age of discount airfare. So I went to Japan, and I started writing these letters home. And now when I talk to the kids, I'm looking around, I'm like, it was on airmail paper. There was no email, like crinkly airmail paper, right, with no lines, and the cover of the thing used to have the lines, and you would stick the lines underneath the paper, and then you would move it to the next one. And I wrote these letters home. I should tell the story to my kids, who were just teenagers. The other day, on my first day, I went to this family in Japan, and this woman, who still is the best cook I ever saw, she was this amazing cook. She'd grown up in China, and she had 2 Bunsen burners and a toaster oven, and this is all she ever cooked in. And she said, "What do you do when you have an honored guest? You serve your treasured, home specialty dish." And in her case, it was liver pie. And it's like, I would eat anything, but I would not have eaten liver. And I suffered through this liver pie. And I went upstairs, so they had like tatami mat. They would, roll up the tables, put up the tatami mat. They had 1 bed, and they gave it to me. And the only thing they knew about me is that I'm like 6'2", and I would put a foot over the bed. And so they went to all the neighbors, and they got microwave and television boxes, and they stacked it at the end of the bed, and they covered it in towels so that my legs had something to stick on. So I went, I sat in my little bed, came down for breakfast, and I learned my first lesson about life in Japan, which is that breakfast is leftovers from the night before. So on Sunday morning, I was served cold liver pie. And I got up and I wrote a letter home, like, you're not going to believe what happened to me. And I wrote these stories, these letters home, and when I got back to Savannah, 6 months later, everywhere I went, people said, "I loved your letters." And it was people like you, and I was like, "Have we met?" And it turned out that my grandmother had Xeroxed them and passed them around, and they went viral in a sort of 1987 sense of the word. And I was like, well, this is that interesting to me and to all these people, like, I should write a book about this. I didn't know anyone had ever written a book. I did 2 things, basically. I went to the Chatham-Effingham County Public Library, right, on Bull Street, on Victory and Abercorn. Is it Bull or Abercorn? It's Bull, right? Yeah. And I checked out the only book on publishing they had, which was a book about propaganda in World War II. And I went to see Rosemary. This is just a drop-dead true story, which I never tell. So my father, you have to understand Rosemary at the time. Rosemary was deep into her life, but for those of you who heard earlier, I was talking about SCAD. Savannah is not a place that welcomes outsiders who live non-traditional lives, to be genteel about it. And Rosemary was partly of this town and partly outside of this town at that time. And my father, there used to be a seafood restaurant just up the road called Williams Seafood, for those of you who are from here. And my father used to have a saying, you want to be involved in politics, you have to be able to talk to everybody in Williams. And my father, who's at the end of his life, literally in hospice, not that far from here, would talk to anybody, right? So that my father and Rosemary had met like in political circles, I think, is actually sort of
had me come and speak at one of my books. That is a real estate guy.
Exactly, and that would have been not done in large parts of Sonata at the time, but my father didn't care. And so he said, go see this woman. And I went to see Rosemary. She lived where she lived for a long time on Havisham. And I climbed the stairs into Rosemary, and it was like I don't know how to describe it. It was like I had come home. I mean, it was not my home, right? I grew up in the South Side, myself a non-traditional home, but I instantly felt at home. Rosemary had a little office in the corner where she would put inspirational post-it notes, I don't even know post-it notes were made at the time, to herself, like that would motivate her writing. And she did what she's doing to all of you. Opened her arms, now I know in retrospect that she was judgmental of me before, but opened her arms. You did, you said he's just a kid, I don't care about him, what the hell does he know? But you opened, once I got through, once I had written my way in through the door, opened her arms, and took me, I would say took me to the breast, but I don't want to be that way, but and said, we can be kindred spirits, and we found in each other, and I found in her a mentor, a kindred spirit, even though we had grown up in entirely different worlds. And I just honestly believe that was the first time anyone had treated me that way. It's emotional to me now, and it's profound to me now, and I think it's part of what it means to do this in the world. One of the things that I believe deeply about writing is that we have these two birds on our shoulders. Okay? And these two birds are perched on our shoulders, and one of them speaks, and they speak into our ears. And one of them says, you are fucking good, man. Like this thing, people are going to weep when they read this, and they're going to laugh when they read this, and the world needs this, and you just keep going, girl, you're doing a really good job, and this is really important, and you're going to change the world. And there's another bird on the other shoulder that's sitting there saying, this sucks. What the hell are you doing? Go to law school. Go back, go back to the chicken coop, wherever you came from, wherever you belong. Go back. You are wasting your time. Does the world need writing? And is the world going to be a better place? Nobody gives a darn about your story or you. And these two birds are these like stereos in our ears and in our hearts and in our souls. And that our job as writers is to shut this one up long enough and listen to this one to get it down. And then ironically, you then need to listen to this one to be critical of your own writing. Like part of being a writer is being a good reader of your own writing, but you have to listen to this. And I don't know the quality of this, but I think that bird needs people like you to, give it voice or inflate it or make it large enough. And you help do that to me, and I'm sitting here now, and I went to my 30th college reunion last year, having never held a job. This is the only thing that I've ever done. And you're part of that story. You're part of my story, and insofar as my story has affected lots of people in the world, that's
your stories have affected many people.
So I can do a lot of things here. I'm here to be helpful in some way. You tell me what you want to do.
Well, while you were speaking then, I just wanted to, something I repeated to my writing groups at times that you told me is one time when you were maybe a lot earlier in your career, you told me about talking to your agent and saying, I have to make a living, with kids and so on, but I'm just worried about how, I'm going to be able to write enough and do enough and, get it out there. And you said it was like a wall, and then he said, don't look at the wall. That stuck in my mind. He said, don't look at the wall. Because I thought that was such incredible advice. Obviously,
that's true. I'm not sure that I ever told you that story. That story appears in the Council of Dads.
Oh,
so Fields. She tried to take two books. My book, which is called Learn to Bow, and Backlash by Susan Felitti. And her boss she was a contemporary of mine, still a friend of mine. Her boss was like, okay, Backlash is going to be a huge book. No one gives a shit about Feiler, which by the way was a very sound business decision. You can take Feiler, and Backlash went on to become what Susan Felitti's Backlash became. she published that book at Crown. At Mifflin, Tickner and Fields. And just to quickly go through the story, I wrote books in my 20s about traveling around, entering different worlds, and writing about that, back to me being the Jew in Georgia, right? So Learning to Bow is about a year I spent teaching junior high school in Japan. Looking for Class is about a year I spent as a graduate student at Cambridge. I spent a year performing as a clown in a traveling circus.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Under the Big Top, a season with the circus.
Yeah.
Each of these had a different publisher. And then I went to Nashville. The reason I'm going to Nashville was because I was the Southerner and I was interested in the South, and the South had changed, right? And that book, in its original conception, was about how these formerly Southern things, like country music and stock car racing and barbecue, that had been regional things, had now gone national and international. And it was like, let's talk about how these represented the changing South. And I went to Nashville. I spent a year traveling around with Garth Brooks and Winona and Ray Hayes and Waylon Jennings. And I wrote this book called Dreaming Out Loud. While I was there, I was living across the street from 3 churches. There used to be this alternate weekly in Nashville called the Nashville Scene, and they used to have like the Village Voice or the Creative Loafing for Lantern's or whatever, and they used to have like a You're So Nashville If competition, and everybody would submit things, and the winner the year I moved there was You're So Nashville If you can give directions to every place in town with turn left at the Kroger, turn right at the church. And so I was living across the street from 3 churches. I was in my early 30s at this point. I was like, okay, I can't deny it anymore. I'm a writer. I need to know more about the Bible, right? Because I hadn't read it since I was a kid, which meant I hadn't really read it. And so I took my bar mitzvah Bible literally off my shelf. I put it by my bed. It gathered dust for 2 years. I went to see an old friend in Jerusalem. And on my first day, my friend took me to this promenade overlooking the city and said, here's this controversial neighborhood, and that's the rock where Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac. I was like, oh, here's an idea. Like, what if I travel along the route and read the Bible along the way? Like, what if I join the Bible? I didn't say this publicly for a long time, because I thought it was sacrilegious. Now I don't care. But I was like, what if I join the Bible as if it were the circus and become a part of it? So I did. I spent a year, I climbed Mount Ararat looking for Noah's Ark. I crossed the Red Sea. I tasted manna. I wrote a book called Walking the Bible that became a thing. Spent a year and a half on the bestseller list, and I went back and made a TV series for PBS about it, and that became my life. And I wrote 5 books, and that's the 5th one, but out of any in the next, 10 years, that were these kind of biblical adventure stories. Like, I am fundamentally 2 things. Actually, I've now decided on a 3rd thing. But the 2 things I said for years I'm an experientialist. I like to go and do things. And then I'm an explainaholic. Now that's part of the patriarchy and a bad thing, right? Because men or whatever, they're mansplaining, right? I'm not going to mansplain, I guess, unfortunately. So now I've been dinosaured. But anyway, so I wrote 5 books about that, and that was my life. Until 10 years ago, this summer. I was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer in my left leg. And I got married, I had children, and it looked like I was going to die. I don't have to go into it, but I reached out to 6 men that were in my life, and I asked them to form a council of dads. And so I wrote this book called The Council of Dads that is about to go through its 5th development cycle in Hollywood. The NBC is trying to turn it into a drama to go with This Is Us, if anybody is a This Is Us watcher. So for a long time they were like, TV's about anti-heroes, right? The Americans, The Sopranos, and now there's a weepy melodrama, and they've gone through Hollywood. Any weepy melodramas around, and CAA said, we got the Council of Dads. So anyway, so I asked 6 men from my life to be father figures for my daughters, and I wrote this book that's portraits of them and life lessons from them, portraits of my father, my grandfathers. And then there's the story of David Black, who's my literary agent, and I was saying, well, I had an agent named Jane Distel, who was a kind of a tough, kind of grandmotherly type, who was like, honey, you live to me, and, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. And it's just not who I am, because I like to talk about things, and think about it, whatever. So I left after 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 books actually, because I had everything except a path to viability for my writing, frankly. And so I went and I shopped a bunch of agents. David was my one of the people on that list, and I walked in, and I said, I'm 6'2", he's 5'2", on a good day in cowboy boots. And he took one look at me, and he's like, if I were your height, I'd be in the NBA. Okay? And so I was like, oh, that's, self-delusion is a good thing, especially when when they're representing you. And so when I sat down with him, and I was like, what would you tell my daughters? He's a kind of a guy's guy in the sense that he bought a sports car when he's 50, but he couldn't wait. He bought it when he's 49. He answers the phone, motherfucker. He represents all the great sports. He's a badass. But he also he hugs and he weeps and he leaves school early to coach Little League when his kid was younger. So he's that kind of new guy, old guy, and that's kind of what you need in an agent. For those of you who have agents or might be looking for agents, right? You need somebody that will hold your hand, but also be a badass in the right mix. And I said to him, I was like, if you were going to give a lesson to my daughters, what would you say? And he said, don't see the wall.
Okay.
That was the line that you mentioned. I was like, when I came to see you, I was at a wall. Like, I had been doing this for 10 years, and I couldn't figure out, was this a living, or just, back to the law school, or the chicken coop, Mom left to do something else, but this bird was a little louder on my shoulder. And he was like, you come up with a dream, and we got to find, everyone's going to hit a wall, and you got to find a way to get over, around, or through the wall, but you can't give in to the wall. And I was like, but I was like, how are you going to do this? He's like, I'm going to tell your children if they want to run a marathon, or bake a souffle, or open a store, write a book, you have to have a plan, and you have to have an achievable dream. And I do think that there's a lot of wisdom of that that's relevant to this room. I think, I have this thing now of what I call, one of my favorite rules of writing these days is that when people like you come to see people like me, I say that, and a lot of friends, we all get these calls. I got a call from Ivy, and I said, you should go see Rosemary, she's better at this than I am. But one of my things is that 80% is structure. And for a long time I said 80% is structure. Like if you're writing a book, I don't really care if it's a thriller, you did that, if it's a memoir, if it's a piece of nonfiction, 80% is structure. If the bones are not there, and I submit to you that any book that you read that you like has good bones and they're invisible. Like it's almost like if you can see the bones are not good. It's like someone's sick, you don't want to be sick enough to see the bones, but it has to have good bones. It's like a house. So for a long time, I said what I believe, which is that 80% is structure. But here's what I also have realized I believe. 80% is voice, 80% is execution, 80% is scheduling and time management, and so therefore I've decided that writing a book is what I call the 80% rule. That everything is 80% important. The 80-20 rule is bullshit, right? Because nothing is only 20% important. Everything is 80% important, okay? So here's some of my hard-earned women. And so I think, but what I think of it as is like taking the unmanageable and making it manageable, right? So I don't think of writing, how many people, half the people writing memoirs, who said they're writing a memoir here? Sorry. So I don't think, and I'm not a fiction writer, but I know enough, and I know the fiction writers know it's very similar. I don't think, I'm sitting down to write a book, okay, in the 3rd week of October, and I'm not writing a book. I don't think of it as I'm writing a book. A book is a series of chapters, a chapter is a series of sections, a section is a series of paragraphs, and a paragraph is a series of sentences. I see it as a series of small, manageable tasks. And another sort of top 5 rule of mine of writing is that writing is, I think of writing, again, it's proof that I'm analog, old guy all of a sudden, but writing is like being an archer, okay? So, my name is Feiler, which is archer in German, and I never made that connection, even though I've had this theory for a long time. And that think of yourself as a writer as having a quiver on your back. And that the goal of yourself as a writer, especially for those of you who are just starting out with this, is to put arrows in the quiver, okay? And what an arrow is a technique. An arrow is a technique so that when you're halfway through a paragraph, and you're fucked, and you're stuck, and you don't know how to get out of that paragraph, you need to think of the archer in the woods, and you need another technique to pull out of your bag to shoot your way out of the wood, the paragraph that you're stuck in. That might be dialogue. It might be description. It might be poetry. It might be quote. It might be killing off somebody or whatever. Each of those things is a technique. So for those of you who are just starting out, or for those of you who've been doing this for 12 years, or in my case doing it for 31 years, or in your case doing it for, yeah, exactly, whatever number you want to assign to it, I still feel like at this point in my life, I'm putting hours in my curriculum. And that when I'm reading, often when I'm reading, one of the things I'm doing is stealing, a book steal like an art, you're stealing quivers, arrows from other people.
We were talking about that right before you came, the importance of being analytical about your writing.
Yes, and that could be structure, that could be technique, that could be how they started the paragraph. I mean, I have 13 girls, and they're not sort of fiction writers, but they do write a lot in their school, and they're very good with writing. We're having a double bat mitzvah for them in October, and they're writing down. And I'm just literally like, okay, you know, I'm not sure this applies. I'd like to know if this applies to people, adults. So my favorite, I'm thinking about writing a YA book on writing, actually. So my favorite dadism is that here's my favorite dadism on writing. It's a writing statement, which is, don't have a crappy paper, use your bowels. Okay?
Use your bowels?
Yes, don't have a crappy paper, use your bowels. Bowels is brainstorm, outline, write, edit, look over, submit. Okay? And so, if my daughters bring me a piece of writing, they have writing probably 3 times a week in their school, they go to a very artsy school in Brooklyn. If they bring me a piece of writing, and there's literally, we're working on one this morning, this little Devar Torah, this little speech they have to read about their Torah portion. They bring me a piece of writing, I can tell them what step they have skipped. I literally can look at the writing and say, you outlined but you didn't brainstorm, or you brainstormed but you didn't edit, you know, or I can literally look and tell you what stage, because I think the brainstorming is the, I don't know, what do I think, hardest? I don't know. I think that outlining is the most important.
Outlining,
But the brainstorm, what I think with brainstorming them is like you have to brainstorm, you put 30 ideas down, because they don't want to do this, they're 13. You put 13 ideas, you put 30 ideas down, I guarantee you the best ones will be in the last 5. Guarantee you. Because you got to get through the obvious ones, and then get through the pointy ones, and the best ones are when you're, Twyla Tharp, in her book on creativity, which is a really wonderful book, by the way, talks about like a 30-second thing. She's like, 30 seconds, how many ideas can you put? Like, she puts a chair out, and she says, how many uses of that chair? And she says, and she'll say, sitting, standing, she's like, the first 7 always have the same things. Okay, and then the middle 7, they start getting more creative, whatever, and then the ones in the last 10 minutes are when it gets outrageous and really interesting. And it just really makes a lot of sense to me. But I think the outlining is the most important, because that's when you do the kind of the pre-thinking, right? And by the way, can I just, before I move on to the next one, can I test, I'm going to make a statement, I'm curious how many people agree with this. Because I see it with my kids a lot, and I see it with friends of mine who are not writers, who are trying to write something. I see it with my wife, who has to do a lot of public speaking, and she has to do it for me. And I'm curious if this is a universal truth or not. And if you disagree, please tell me. So here's my thing, and this is, that writing is easy, but thinking is hard.
Yeah. Oh, well, I don't know.
Tell me if you agree, you don't agree.
I don't agree.
So my feeling is, whenever you're stuck writing, it's because you haven't done the thinking. So that when you've done the thinking, the writing will come, and that when you're stuck, when you're finding the writing hard, it's because you haven't done the thinking, or the emotional work, or the creative work to get to the point. So that the being stuck in writing is actually an expression of being stuck thinking.
Well, I
Agree or disagree?
To a certain degree, but also you have to work hard enough to have skills. You got to know how to put stuff down.
You need the arrows.
You need the arrows, right. So
I think it's feeling.
What?
For me, it's not thinking, it's feeling.
Well,
that makes sense. I certainly can.
that's a form of thinking.
I certainly would attach that amendment, but it still doesn't change the fundamental structure of what I'm saying. So,
I don't know, there's such a one. One to me is the ability to write is the practice, but also you're constantly into this thing of the depth of seeking, truth of what it is.
Right.
Seeking to write. So you want to be sure that you're getting to the truth some way.
Right.
Writing is.
I was glad you told me that, Rosemary.
But I want to say one thing about you is that I think you're like a perfect combination of left and right brain. And I
Right.
really think that's what it takes.
That's interesting.
It's not, a lot of us are really right brain, a lot of us are really left brain, but really to be a good writer, you've got to have both. You really
Yes.
do. You have to have left and right. And one thing your wife Linda said to me about you one time, I think you were out of the room when I was visiting your family, and she said that you are the most focused human being she's ever met.
That's interesting.
And
What?
I know Linda
Focused.
is a very high achiever herself,
It's super.
of the first order,
Yeah,
and so for her to say that,
That's
so
interesting.
observing how you live.
yeah, because I won't let her bullshit. I'll like just drill down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
I'm not sure that was entirely a compliment coming from her.
Yeah.
This is my wife who started and runs an organization called Endeavor that supports entrepreneurs.
She is a writer herself.
In
She
30
wrote
countries, she did write a book, yeah. In 30 countries around the world, she's about to get the Teresa Hines Award this fall, which is sort of the MacArthur of nonprofits. Yeah, I mean, on that, look, one of my old things I've said about writing for a long time is that, let me just say, me personally, I think of myself as I'm a middle child. I'm a B. Bruce is my name. I have an older brother A and younger sister C. They named us like hurricanes. Maybe that's the Tybee in our family. But my father is a very disciplined person, and my mother is a very, very kind of natural, inchoate, creative person who in her early 80s, to a certain extent, was a kind of a woman too early for her time, who was kind of frustrated that her creativity kind of never
She
found.
was involved with the Georgia Council of the Arts.
Yeah, and then she ran the Telfair when she was running the Telfair when Jim Williams,
This is
who's the murderer in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, was chairman of the board and was taking antiques from the Telfair and taking them out and putting replicas in their place. And my father was president of the Mikveh Israel Synagogue, which is the third oldest congregation in the country, which is across the street from the house where the murder takes place. And for those of you who read the book, there's this, and he was hanging Nazi flags out on Yom Kippur because people parked in front of his house.
Wow.
My mother was
That's
a
when making a film. He stopped the filmmaking by hanging a Nazi flag out.
and my mother was a character witness in the trial against Jim. She was never called.
Really?
Yes. And I think of course, that story and Zona Rosa when John came to town to write that, and also came to Zona Rosa I met him there actually, because I was learning to bow at that time, and he was there. And my second book came out both at Random House at that time. But anyway, so I think of my mother as basically my father as being I can't remember which is the
You said he was
left and which is the right brain.
He's the left.
He's the left brain and my mother the right brain, and I think that they both sort of combined in me. But but one of the earliest things I ever said about writing is that writing is the nexus of time management and emotional management, and that's your left and your right. So you have to be able to manage the two birds, back to my thing, and know that you're going to get stuck and you're going to hit paragraphs and you're going to hit difficult, and how you structure the time. And the time management and emotional management, so that you get them synced up enough to get something out.
Yeah. I agree with that totally. This book, I just think I love this book. This is your most recent book.
It is my most recent.
Yes, and I felt like all your skills.
It's called The First Love Story. It's a kind of a retelling. It's a journey around the world, reimagining the story of Adam and Eve, not as a story of sin and destruction.
It's about love. It's about love.
Yeah, but it's the first love story. They have something to tell us about relationships today.
I just felt like all your skills came together in this book. It is so readable, and the diversity